Socrates was a classical Greek philosopher credited as one of the founders of Western philosophy. He is an enigmatic figure known chiefly through the accounts of classical writers, especially the writings of his students Plato and Xenophon and the plays of his contemporary Aristophanes. Plato's dialogues are among the most comprehensive accounts of Socrates to survive from antiquity, though it is unclear the degree to which Socrates himself is hidden behind his best disciple, Plato. Through his portrayal in Plato's dialogues, Socrates has become renowned for his contribution to the field of ethics, and it is this Platonic Socrates who lends his name to the concepts of Socratic irony and the Socratic method, or elenchus. The latter remains a commonly used tool in a wide range of discussions, and is a type of pedagogy in which a series of questions is asked not only to draw individual answers, but also to encourage fundamental insight into the issue at hand. Plato's Socrates also made important and lasting contributions to the field of epistemology, and his ideologies and approach have proven a strong foundation for much Western philosophy that has followed. The Socratic Problem. Socrates never individually wrote anything that remains extant. As a result, all first-hand information about him and his philosophies depend upon secondary sources. Furthermore, close comparison between the contents of these sources reveals contradictions, thus creating concerns about the possibility of knowing in depth the real Socrates. This issue is known as the Socratic Problem, or the Socratic Question. To understand Socrates and his thought, one must turn primarily to the works of Plato, whose dialogues are thought the most informative source about Socrates' life and philosophy, and also Xenophon. These writings are the Socratiko-logoi, or Socratic dialogues, which consist of reports of conversations apparently involving Socrates. As for discovering the real-life Socrates, the difficulty is that ancient sources are mostly philosophical or dramatic texts. Apart from Xenophon, there are no straightforward histories, contemporary with Socrates, that dealt with his own time and place. A corollary of this is that sources that do mention Socrates do not necessarily claim to be historically accurate, and are often partisan. For instance, those who prosecuted and convicted Socrates have left no testament. Historians therefore face the challenge of reconciling the various evidence from the extant texts in order to attempt an accurate and consistent account of Socrates' life and work. The result of such an effort is not necessarily realistic, even if consistent. Amid all the disagreement resulting from differences within sources, two factors emerge from all sources pertaining to Socrates. It would seem, therefore, that he was ugly, and that Socrates had a brilliant intellect. Socrates as a figure. The character of Socrates as exhibited in Apology, Crito, Phaedo and Symposium concurs with other sources to an extent to which it seems possible to rely on the Platonic Socrates, as demonstrated in the dialogues, as a representation of the actual Socrates as he lived in history. At the same time, however, many scholars believe that in some works, Plato, being a literary artist, pushed his avowedly brightened-up version of Socrates far beyond anything the historical Socrates was likely to have done or said. Also, Xenophon, being an historian, is a more reliable witness to the historical Socrates. It is a matter of much debate over which Socrates it is whom Plato is describing at any given point, the historical figure, or Plato's fictionalization. As British philosopher Martin Cohen has put it, Plato, the idealist, offers an idol, a master figure for philosophy, a saint, a prophet of the sun god, a teacher condemned for his teachings as a heretic. It is also clear from other writings and historical artifacts that Socrates was not simply a character, nor an invention, of Plato. The testimony of Xenophon and Aristotle, alongside some of Aristophanes' work, is useful in fleshing out a perception of Socrates beyond Plato's work. Socrates as a philosopher. The problem with discerning Socrates' philosophical views stems from the perception of contradictions in statements made by the Socrates in the different dialogues of Plato. These contradictions produce doubt as to the actual philosophical doctrines of Socrates within his milieu and as recorded by other individuals. Aristotle, in his Magna Moralia, refers to Socrates in words which make it patent that the doctrine virtuous knowledge was held by Socrates. Within the Metaphysics, he states Socrates was occupied with the search for moral virtues, being the first to search for universal definitions for them. The problem of understanding Socrates as a philosopher is shown in the following. In Xenophon's Symposium, Socrates is reported as saying he devotes himself only to what he regards as the most important art or occupation, that of discussing philosophy. However, in The Clouds, Aristophanes portrays Socrates as accepting payment for teaching and running a sophist school with Chaerephon. Also, in Plato's Apology and Symposium, as well as in Xenophon's accounts, Socrates explicitly denies accepting payment for teaching. More specifically, in the Apology, Socrates cites his poverty as proof that he is not a teacher. Two fragments are extant of the writings by Timon of Phlius pertaining to Socrates. Although Timon is known to have written to ridicule and lampoon philosophy. Biography. Details about the life of Socrates can be derived from three contemporary sources: the dialogues of Plato and Xenophon, and the plays of Aristophanes. He has been depicted by some scholars, including Eric Havelock and Walter Ong, as a champion of oral modes of communication, standing against the haphazard diffusion of writing. In Aristophanes' play The Clouds, Socrates is made into a clown of sorts, particularly inclined towards sophistry, who teaches his students how to bamboozle their way out of debt. However, since most of Aristophanes' works function as parodies, it is presumed that his characterization in this play was also not literal. Early life. Socrates was born in Alepique, and belonged to the tribe Antiochus. His father was Sophroniscus, a sculptor, or stonemason. His mother was a midwife named Phanerete. Socrates married Xanthippe, who was especially remembered for having an undesirable temperament. She bore for him 3 sons, Lamprocles, Sophroniscus and Menexenus. His friend Crito of Alepiche criticized him for abandoning them when he refused to try to escape before his execution. Socrates first worked as a stonemason, and there was a tradition in antiquity, not credited by modern scholarship, that Socrates crafted the statues of the 3 Graces, which stood near the Acropolis until the 2nd century AD. Xenophon reports that because youths were not allowed to enter the agora, they used to gather in workshops surrounding it. Socrates frequented these shops in order to converse with the merchants. Most notable among them was Simon the shoemaker. Military service. For a time, Socrates fulfilled the role of hoplite, participating in the Peloponnesian War, a conflict which stretched intermittently over a period spanning 431 to 404 BC. Several of Plato's dialogues refer to Socrates' military service. In the monologue of the Apology, Socrates states he was active for Athens in the battles of Amphipolis, Delium, and Potidaea. In the Symposium, Alcibiades describes Socrates' valor in the battles of Potidaea and Delium, recounting how Socrates saved his life in the former battle. Socrates' exceptional service at Delium is also mentioned in the Laches by the general after whom the dialogue is named. In the Apology, Socrates compares his military service to his courtroom troubles, and says anyone on the jury who thinks he ought to retreat from philosophy must also think soldiers should retreat when it seems likely that they will be killed in battle. Appius states at the trial of the 6 commanders during 406, he participated as a member of the Bull. His tribe, the Antiochus, held the prytaeny on the day it was debated what fate should befall the generals of the Battle of Varginus, who abandoned the slain and the survivors of founded ships to pursue the defeated Spartan navy. According to Xenophon, Socrates was the epistates for the debate, but Dellebec and Hatzfeld think this is an embellishment. Because Xenophon composed the information after Socrates' death, the generals were seen by some to have failed to uphold the most basic of duties, and the people decided upon capital punishment. However, when the prytaני responded by refusing to vote on the issue, the people reacted with threats of death directed at the prytaני itself. They relented, at which point Socrates alone as epistates blocked the vote, which had been proposed by Kallikrates. The reason he gave was that, in no case would he act except in accordance with the law. The outcome of the trial was ultimately judged to be a miscarriage of justice, or illegal, but, actually, Socrates' decision had no support from written statutory law, instead being reliant on favoring a continuation of less strict and less formal nomos law. The arrest of Leon, Plato's Apology, parts 32c to 32d, describes how Socrates and 4 others were summoned to the Tholis, and told by representatives of the oligarchy of the 30 to go to Salamis, and from there, to return to them with Leon the Salaminian. He was to be brought back to be subsequently executed. However, Socrates returned home and did not go to Salamis as he was expected to. Trial and death. Socrates lived during the time of the transition from the height of the Athenian hegemony to its decline with the defeat by Sparta and its allies in the Peloponnesian War, at a time when Athens sought to stabilize and recover from its humiliating defeat. The Athenian public may have been entertaining doubts about democracy as an efficient form of government. Socrates appears to have been a critic of democracy, and some scholars interpret his trial as an expression of political infighting. Claiming loyalty to his city, Socrates clashed with the current course of Athenian politics and society. He praises Sparta, arch-rival to Athens, directly and indirectly in various dialogues. One of Socrates' purported offenses to the city was his position as a social and moral critic, rather than upholding a status quo and accepting the development of what he perceived as immorality within his region. Socrates questioned the collective notion of might makes right that he felt was common in Greece during this period. Plato refers to Socrates as the gadfly of the state, insofar as he irritated some people with considerations of justice and the pursuit of goodness. His attempts to improve the Athenian sense of justice may have been the cause of his execution. According to Plato's Apology, Socrates' life as the gadfly of Athens began when his friend Chaerephon asked the oracle at Delphi if anyone were wiser than Socrates. The oracle responded that no one was wiser. Socrates believed the oracle's response was a paradox, because he believed he possessed no wisdom whatsoever. He proceeded to test the riddle by approaching men considered wise by the people of Athens, statesmen, poets, and artisans, in order to refute the oracle's pronouncement. Questioning them, however, Socrates concluded, while each man thought he knew a great deal and was wise, in fact they knew very little and were not wise at all. Socrates realized the oracle was correct, while so-called wise men thought themselves wise and yet were not. He himself knew he was not wise at all, which paradoxically made him the wiser one since he was the only person aware of his own ignorance. Socrates' paradoxical wisdom made the prominent Athenians he publicly questioned look foolish, turning them against him and leading to accusations of wrongdoing. Socrates defended his role as a gadfly until the end. At his trial, when Socrates was asked to propose his own punishment, he suggested a wage paid by the government and free dinners for the rest of his life instead, to finance the time he spent as Athens' benefactor. He was, nevertheless, found guilty of both corrupting the minds of the youth of Athens and of impiety. and subsequently sentenced to death by drinking a mixture containing poison hemlock. According to Xenophon's story, Socrates purposefully gave a defiant defense to the jury because he believed he would be better off dead. Xenophon goes on to describe a defense by Socrates that explains the rigors of old age, and how Socrates would be glad to circumvent him by being sentenced to death. It is also understood that Socrates also wished to die because he actually believed the right time had come for him to die. Xenophon and Plato agree that Socrates had an opportunity to escape, as his followers were able to bribe the prison guards. There have been several suggestions offered as reasons why he chose to stay. He believed such a flight would indicate his fear of death, which he believed no true philosopher has. If he fled Athens, his teaching would fare no better in another country, as he would continue questioning all he met and undoubtedly incur their displeasure. Having knowingly agreed to live under the city's laws, he implicitly subjected himself to the possibility of being accused of crimes by its citizens and judged guilty by its jury. To do otherwise would have caused him to break his social contract with the state, and so harm the state, an unprincipled act. If he escaped at the instigation of his friends, then his friends would become liable in law. The full reasoning behind his refusal to flee is the main subject of the Crito. Socrates' death is described at the end of Plato's Phaedo. Socrates turned down Crito's pleas to attempt an escape from prison. After drinking the poison, he was instructed to walk around until his legs felt numb. After he lay down, the man who administered the poison pinched his foot. Socrates could no longer feel his legs. The numbness slowly crept up his body until it reached his heart. Shortly before his death, Socrates speaks his last words to Crito. Crito, we owe a rooster to Asclepius. Please, don't forget to pay the debt. Asclepius was the Greek god for curing illness, and it is likely Socrates' last words meant that death is the cure, and freedom, of the soul from the body. Additionally, in Why Socrates Died, Dispelling the Myths, Robin Waterfield adds another interpretation of Socrates' last words. He suggests that Socrates was a voluntary scapegoat. His death was the purifying remedy for Athens' misfortunes. In this view, the token of appreciation for Asclepius would represent a cure for Athens' ailments.